Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling the world of predictions and judgments and cognitive biases. Those fascinating mental quirks that can trip us up when we least expect it.
Absolutely. These are some of the core concepts explored in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which you've sent us some clips about, so let's dive right in.
Yeah, some really great stuff there. One of the excerpts that you sent over recounts Kahneman's experience in the Israeli army. He was assigned to evaluate soldiers, predicting their success in officer training, which, sounds like a pretty daunting task.
It does, and he describes watching these soldiers meticulously, observing them as they navigated obstacle courses, and he felt, as a psychologist, very confident in his
He
predictions.
must have felt like he had a pretty good grasp of what it took to succeed.
He did, but the results weren't quite what he expected.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting. So what happened? Did his predictions turn out to be accurate?
Well, not exactly. After following up on the performance of the soldiers, Kahneman discovered that his predictions were basically no better than random chance.
Wow, that's surprising. So even with his expertise and careful observations, he was still way off the mark. That's a bit unsettling.
It is, and this experience led him to coin the term illusion of validity. It basically describes our tendency to overestimate our predictive abilities. We have this inherent belief that we can accurately predict outcomes.
Even when we have limited information, it seems like we're wired to see patterns and make predictions, even if those predictions aren't really grounded in anything solid.
Especially when we have limited information. And this illusion, it's not limited to military evaluations, of course. It pops up everywhere.
Oh, I bet. Like, I'm already thinking about all the times I've made snap judgments about people, first impressions and all that. How does this illusion of validity play into things like, say, hiring decisions?
Think about it. You're sitting across from a candidate, trying to assess their suitability for a job based on a short interview. You might feel like you're getting a good sense of who they are, their abilities, their potential.
Right, you're looking for those subtle cues, trying to read between the lines.
Exactly. But the reality is, we often overestimate our ability to make accurate judgments in these situations.
So the illusion of validity is basically tricking us into thinking we're better judges of character than we actually are.
That's one way to put it. We place too much faith in our snap judgments, our gut feelings.
And this doesn't just apply to job interviews, right? I mean, think about first dates. Even those quick interactions we have with people in our daily lives, we're constantly making these rapid-fire assessments.
Absolutely. And it's not always a bad thing. Intuition can be valuable, but it's crucial to understand its limitations. Especially in situations where we lack sufficient information, relying solely on our gut feeling can lead to some pretty bad decisions.
So, if human judgment can be so flawed, so susceptible to these biases, is there a more reliable way to make predictions? What about using algorithms? Could they offer a more objective, less biased perspective?
That's where the work of Paul Meehl becomes really fascinating. He conducted extensive research comparing the accuracy of predictions made by trained professionals, like psychologists, to those generated by simple algorithms.
So basically pitting human expertise against the power of data and algorithms. What were the results?
The results were pretty astonishing. Algorithms consistently outperformed the experts across a wide range of fields. It seems that, in many cases, a simple algorithm can make more accurate predictions than a seasoned professional.
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing.
I
So the machines are beating us at our own game. Why are these algorithms so much better at predicting outcomes? What's their secret advantage?
Well, they have a few key advantages. First off, algorithms are immune to bias. They don't have emotions, prejudices, or personal opinions that can cloud their judgment. They just process information and make calculations based on the data.
So they're purely objective, not swayed by those subtle human influences.
Exactly. They're like these emotionless judges, evaluating information without any preconceived notions.
That makes sense. What else gives them an edge?
Another advantage is their consistency. Algorithms apply the same rules, the same criteria, to every case, every single time.
So unlike humans, they don't have good days and bad days. They're always operating at peak performance.
Precisely. They don't get tired, they don't get distracted, and they don't let emotions interfere with their analysis. And this consistency is crucial for making accurate predictions.
Right, it eliminates that human element of variability. Anything else that contributes to their success.
Well, algorithms excel at detecting subtle patterns in data, patterns that might be completely invisible to the human eye. Think of it like this. Our brains are amazing at recognizing faces, understanding language, all those complex tasks that we do effortlessly. But when it comes to analyzing massive amounts of data, we're not so great.
We get overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information.
Exactly. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But algorithms, they thrive in that environment. They can sift through mountains of data, identifying subtle correlations and patterns that we might completely miss.
So they're like these super-powered pattern detectors, uncovering those hidden gems of insight.
Precisely. And a great example of this is Orley Ashenfelter's formula for predicting the price of Bordeaux wine.
Wine. That's interesting. So even in a field as seemingly subjective as wine tasting, algorithms can still outperform human experts.
It seems so. Ashenfelter's formula, based purely on weather data, temperature, rainfall, all those objective factors, consistently provided accurate predictions of future wine values, often surpassing the judgments of expert wine tasters who rely on their senses, their intuition, and their years of experience.
So even the most discerning palates can't compete with the cold, hard logic of an algorithm. That's a bit humbling. Does this mean human judgment is inherently flawed? Should we just abandon it altogether and let the algorithms rule the world?
Well, hold on. Not so fast. Human intuition still plays a vital role in many areas, but we do need to understand its limitations and be aware of those situations where it might lead us astray. That's where Kahneman's concept of taming intuitive predictions comes into play. One of his key insights is this distinction between what he calls the inside view and the outside view. He tells this fascinating story about his own team working on a textbook project.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear about this textbook project. What happened?
Well, Kahneman and his team were developing a curriculum, a textbook basically, on, judgment and decision-making for the Israeli Ministry of Education.
So they were teaching high school students about the very biases and mental shortcuts that we're discussing right now. That's pretty meta.
It is. But here's the thing. They had been working on this project for a while, making good progress, feeling optimistic. They estimated that it would take about 2 years to finalize the textbook and deliver it to the ministry. And this estimate, this was their inside view. It was based on their own experiences, their progress, their sense of how things were moving along.
Okay, so they were taking stock of their own progress, making a reasonable estimate based on their current trajectory.
Exactly. But then Kahneman, being the ever-curious scientist, decided to do a little experiment.
Of course he did. He loved his experiments. What did he do?
He asked each team member individually to estimate how long they thought it would take to finish the textbook and deliver it to the ministry.
Okay, so getting everyone's individual perspective, I bet they were all pretty much in agreement.
You'd think so, right? They were all working together, sharing the same workload, seeing the same progress, and most of their estimates were around that 2-year mark, which seemed reasonable given their current progress. But then Kahneman introduced a critical element, what he called the outside view. He asked Seymour, their curriculum expert, a simple question. Have you ever come across other teams that have undertaken similar projects, creating new educational curricula from scratch?
Ah, so he's bringing it at a broader perspective, looking beyond their own limited experience. What did Seymour say?
Seymour, being well-versed in this, he knew of many similar projects. However, he revealed a rather sobering truth. He said, quite a few of those teams, well, they either failed to complete their projects entirely or, he paused, or they took much longer than anticipated. He added, sometimes 7 to 10 years.
Whoa, that's a far cry from their cozy 2-year prediction.
It is. It completely shattered their sense of optimism.
Yeah.
So how do you think the team reacted to this new information?
You'd think they'd be scrambling to revise their timeline, right? I mean, the evidence was staring them in the face.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But that's not what happened. They essentially dismissed the outside view, brushing it aside like it was irrelevant.
But they just ignored the statistical evidence. That seems irrational.
It does. And Kahneman later acknowledged this as a major oversight. They were so blinded by their own optimistic inside view, so deeply invested in their project, that they were unable to objectively assess the potential challenges and the statistical realities.
So what happened? Did they finish the textbook?
They did eventually, but it took them a whopping 8 years.
8 years. More than triple their initial estimate. Ouch. What a painful lesson in the perils of the planning fallacy.
It is. And to add insult to injury, by the time they completed the book, the Ministry of Education had moved on. The curriculum was never even implemented.
Talk about a deflating outcome after all that effort. It really highlights how powerful that inside view can be, how it can distort our perceptions and lead to these wildly optimistic predictions. But is this tendency just limited to project timelines? Or does it show up in other areas of our lives?
Oh, it's pervasive. It affects so many aspects of our decision-making. Another area where it's particularly evident is in the world of finance, specifically in stock picking and market predictions.
Yeah, yes, Wall Street. That makes sense. It's a place where everyone's trying to predict the future, trying to outsmart the market.
Exactly. It's a breeding ground for overconfidence and the illusion of skill. And this is where Kahneman's research gets really interesting. He argues that stock picking is largely a game of chance, that much of what we perceive as skill is actually just luck in disguise. He meticulously analyzed the performance of mutual fund managers over several years, those experts who are supposed to have this magical ability to pick winning stocks.
So are you saying that even the Wall Street gurus, the so-called experts, are susceptible to these biases?
Absolutely. Kahneman found that the year-to-year correlation between the performance of these fund managers was practically non-existent. Their success in one year had almost no bearing on their success the following year. It was essentially like flipping a coin.
So it was all just random noise, no real predictive power. That's hard to believe. These are people with years of experience, access to tons of data, sophisticated algorithms, and they're still just basically guessing.
It seems so, and he didn't stop there. He also conducted an analysis for a Wall Street firm, tracking the performance of their stock picks over an extended period.
I'm guessing the results weren't pretty.
Let's just say they weren't exactly setting the world on fire. They, too, were performing no better than chance. But here's the really interesting part. The firm was completely oblivious to this reality.
They were blind to their own lack of skill.
Completely. They were convinced that they were making smart, informed decisions, that their success was a testament to their expertise. But the data told a different story. They were living in this bubble of illusion, believing they'd cracked the code, when in reality they were just riding the waves of chance.
The illusion of skill is a powerful thing, isn't it? It's incredible how we can cling to the belief that we're in control, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. It really makes you wonder why we cling so tightly to that belief that we can beat the market. What is it about stock picking that fuels this illusion of skill?
Well, I think there are a few things at play here. For one, stock picking does involve a complex set of skills. You're analyzing economic data, you're evaluating company performance, you're trying to understand market trends. It takes time and effort to develop these skills, so it's natural to feel like you've gained some kind of edge.
Right? You put in the work, you do your research, you follow all the latest news, and you start to feel like you're building a real expertise, like you're getting a handle on this complex system.
Exactly. But even with those skills, even with all the research and analysis, you're still operating within a system of immense complexity, a system influenced by countless factors that are completely beyond your control. You're essentially trying to predict the future, and as we all know, the future is inherently unpredictable,
Yeah.
especially in a domain as volatile and dynamic as the stock market.
It does make you question whether it's even possible to consistently predict the market with any degree of accuracy.
That's the big question, isn't it? And Kahneman also points to what he calls the narrative fallacy as a contributing factor to this illusion of skill. As humans, we have this deep-seated need to make sense of the world, to find patterns, to construct narratives that explain why things happen the way they do.
We're storytellers at heart, aren't we? We're always looking for those cause and effect relationships, trying to connect the dots and create a coherent narrative.
And this tendency extends to how we view the stock market. We look back at past market trends, we come up with explanations for why things happen the way they did, and then we assume that we can apply that knowledge to predict future trends.
So we create these stories, these narratives, that give a sense of understanding and control, even if those stories are based on flawed assumptions or, just plain luck.
Exactly. It's almost like we need to believe that we have some power over this chaotic system, that we're not just at the mercy of random events.
And the financial news, it's filled with these narratives, right? Every day, experts offer their explanations for why the market went up or down, making it seem like everything was predictable, like they had it all figured out.
Exactly. They're spinning these stories, weaving these narratives that make us feel informed and in control. And we buy into them because they offer us comfort in the face of uncertainty.
But as you pointed out earlier, Kahneman's research suggests that these narratives, these stories, are often just that, stories. They might make us feel good, but they don't necessarily translate into accurate predictions. So, if our intuition can be so fallible, so prone to these biases and illusions, how can we improve our judgment? How can we make more informed decisions, especially when we're dealing with complex and uncertain situations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One key strategy is to become more aware of what are called base rates. These are the statistical probabilities, the historical trends, that we often overlook when we're focusing on the specifics of a particular case.
So it's about stepping back from our immediate context and looking at the bigger picture, considering the broader statistical trends.
Exactly. Remember Kahneman's textbook project? They were so focused on their own progress, their own timeline, that they completely ignored the base rate of completion for similar projects. If they had considered that outside view, they might have avoided that 8-year delay.
So it's about being more data-driven, more objective, less swayed by our own subjective experiences.
In a way, yes. But it's not just about crunching numbers and ignoring our intuition. It's about finding that balance between trusting our gut feelings and engaging in critical thinking. It's about recognizing that our intuition can be valuable, but it needs to be tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to challenge our own assumptions.
So we need to become our own devil's advocate, constantly questioning our own thinking, looking for evidence that contradicts our beliefs, being open to adjusting our predictions as new information emerges.
Exactly. Humility is key here. We have to acknowledge that our minds are fallible, that we don't always know as much as we think we do, and that we're all susceptible to these cognitive biases.
This is such a crucial point, especially in today's world, where everyone seems to have an opinion and presents themselves as an expert. It's more important than ever to develop those critical thinking skills, to be able to discern between genuine expertise and a convincing illusion. But how do we do that? When can we actually trust expert intuition?
That's a great question, and I think the work of Gary Klein, with his focus on what's called naturalistic decision-making, offers some valuable insights here. Klein has studied experts like firefighters and nurses, those individuals who make rapid decisions under incredibly high-pressure situations.
They have to think on their feet, process information quickly, and make split-second judgments that can have life or death consequences.
Exactly. And Klein argues that their intuition, their ability to quickly assess a situation and choose the best course of action, isn't just some random guess or a mystical sixth sense. It stems from years of experience, a deep understanding of their field, and a finely tuned ability to recognize patterns.
So their intuition is a product of extensive experience, a deep familiarity with the patterns of their profession. They've developed this almost instinctual ability to read a situation and make a quick, informed judgment.
He calls it recognition-primed decision-making. It's like their brains have built up this vast library of past experiences, and when they encounter a new situation, their unconscious mind can swiftly sift through this data and generate a solution almost instantaneously.
It sounds like their intuition is almost a superpower, honed through years of practice, feedback, and real-world experience.
It is a powerful tool, but it's important to remember that this level of expertise, it doesn't develop overnight. It requires time, dedication, a willingness to learn from both successes and failures.
That's reassuring, in a way. It means that even if we don't feel like experts now, we can work towards developing that kind of intuitive expertise in our own fields. But how do we know if someone truly possesses this kind of expertise, or if they're just projecting an illusion of skill?
Well, Kahneman and Klein actually collaborated to create a framework for evaluating expert intuition. They identified two crucial conditions that must be met for intuition to be considered reliable. First, the environment must be predictable. There have to be clear patterns, regularities that an expert can learn over time. Think of a skilled chess player or a seasoned pilot. They operate within systems that have well-defined rules and feedback mechanisms.
So their intuition becomes reliable because they've had extensive practice recognizing those patterns and responding accordingly. It's like they've internalized the rules of the game, so to speak.
Exactly. But the second condition is equally important. The expert must have had adequate opportunities to learn those patterns. They need sufficient experience, feedback, practice to develop that deep intuitive understanding of their field.
And that's where things get tricky. Not all fields are equally predictable, and not all experts have had the same level of training and experience. So it's not enough to simply rely on someone's title or credentials. We have to look deeper, consider the context, the environment, the individual's track record.
Precisely. Blindly trusting anyone who claims to have expert intuition is a recipe for disaster. You have to ask yourself, is this a high-validity environment for making predictions? Does this individual have a proven track record of success in this domain? For example, you probably shouldn't put too much faith in a political pundit making predictions about an election years in advance.
The political landscape is so complex, so influenced by unpredictable events. It's like trying to predict the weather months in advance.
Exactly. It's a low-validity environment for making long-term predictions. However, you might be more inclined to trust the intuition of an experienced doctor who's seen thousands of patients and has developed a deep understanding of how to diagnose and treat a wide range of medical conditions.
In that case, the environment, while still complex, is more predictable than the world of politics. And the doctor has likely had extensive opportunities to learn the patterns of illness and injury. It reminds me of a story that Kahneman tells about his time in the Israeli army. He was tasked with designing an interview system to assess the suitability of recruits for combat duty. Initially, he was skeptical of relying on intuitive judgments, so he created a very structured interview process where interviewers had to rate recruits on specific traits based on factual questions about their past.
Interesting. So even Kahneman, with his focus on cognitive biases, was hesitant to incorporate intuition into the assessment process. What happened? Did he change his mind?
He did, sort of. He also allowed interviewers to give an overall gut feeling score after they'd gathered all the objective data. And to his surprise, those gut feelings turned out to be pretty accurate predictors of performance.
So even in a structured, data-driven assessment, intuition still played a valuable role. What do you think this tells us about the interplay between intuition and analysis?
I think it highlights that intuition isn't some mystical ability that you either have or you don't. It's something that can be developed and refined through practice, feedback, and a willingness to learn. But it's not about relying solely on those gut feelings. It's about finding that balance between trusting our instincts and engaging in critical thinking. It's about being aware of those base rates, questioning our assumptions, seeking out diverse perspectives.
I think that's a key takeaway from our conversation. Intuition and analysis, they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they can work together quite effectively. The key is to understand the limitations of each and use them strategically.
It sounds like we need to be more mindful, more aware of how our minds work. Understanding both the conscious and the unconscious processes that shape our judgments and ultimately our decisions. We've got to be aware of those biases that can sometimes lead us astray, but also recognize that intuition, that gut feeling, can be really powerful when it's grounded in genuine expertise.
Absolutely. We've got to become more sophisticated thinkers, more sophisticated decision makers. And that means understanding our biases, but also knowing when we can trust our gut, especially when those gut feelings are based on, real experience, years of experience, and a deep understanding of a specific field.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like we've covered so much ground, from that illusion of validity to the planning fallacy, the power of algorithms, the surprising value of intuition. I feel equipped with a whole new toolkit for navigating all the complexities of decision-making.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Kahneman's work is packed with these amazing insights into how our minds work, and I encourage you to keep exploring. Really see how these concepts can help you make better decisions in your own life, the big decisions and the small ones.
I'm already starting to think about how I can apply all this in my own life, from planning projects to managing my time to even, how I evaluate information and make those everyday decisions. I'm definitely going to be more aware of those biases now that can really sneak up on you.
That's the key. Awareness is the first step to making better decisions, more informed decisions. And remember, there's always more to learn. The more we understand about our own minds, the better equipped we'll be to make good judgments, sound judgments, and ultimately to live more fulfilling lives.
This has been an incredible exploration of predictions, judgments, and those tricky cognitive biases. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Keep those thinking caps on and stay curious.